This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Connie Chung.
Good evening. Walter Mondale, the expected Democratic presidential nominee, today faced a group that could disrupt his well-planned convention in July. Women. The National Organization for Women is leaning very heavily on Mondale to choose a woman vice presidential candidate. Don Oliver is covering the NOW convention and reports on the building momentum and Mondale's answer to the pressure.
We're going there to get a woman on the ticket.
A year ago, the idea of a woman vice presidential candidate was a pipe dream. Now, 2 weeks before the Democratic National Convention, groups like the National Organization for Women have made it a virtual demand.
If there isn't a woman on the ticket, we won't win.
Despite conflicting polls on the value of a woman running mate, the movement is snowballing. Walter Mondale was endorsed by this organization last December. But at this year's convention, they are telling him he won't get solid support without a woman on the ticket. It was a friendly demonstration, and Mondale was not moved to commit himself.
And if I choose a woman, it will be because she is the best.
Then to the back room and a private meeting with the president of NOW and 3 congresswomen.
Still, we think a woman would be best for you.
Again, Mondale dared to be cautious.
I am looking at the possibility of woman running mate, not because of pressure, but because it's right.
The congressional trio, Mikulski of Maryland, Okar of Ohio, and Kennelly of Connecticut, announced their endorsement of another House member, Ferraro of New York, for vice president. It was just minutes later that she appeared on the platform at the NOW convention.
Our place is in the vice presidency and the presidency.
On Monday, Ferraro will be interviewed by Mondale for the vice president's job. But she has also indicated that if a woman is not selected, she would allow her name to be placed in nomination from the floor of the convention. That prospect has a lot of women here wondering just how far they should go in opposing an all-male ticket in San Francisco.
I honestly don't know what our strategy will be or whether we will mount a major rebellion or not, but I wouldn't guarantee that we won't.
There is talk of a floor fight at the convention if Mondale does not pick a woman, even of a walkout. The strategy is still developing, and the pressure on Mondale is still building. Don Oliver, NBC News, Miami Beach.
Jesse Jackson, now back in the U.S. and still in the race for president, is renewing his veiled threats to keep the Democratic convention on its toes. Jackson continues to put starch in Walter Mondale's plans to have a smooth nomination. Mary Nissenson reports from Chicago.
Jackson has been sending mixed signals from Chicago about what he'll do at the convention and how he'll resolve other controversies which surround him. 2 days ago, he repudiated Louis Farrakhan, but today asked his audience at Operation Push to applaud Farrakhan's assistant and other members of the Nation of Islam.
Give them a hand.
As for San Francisco, Jackson hasn't said what kind of fight he'll wage there, but he told his delegates they have the right to pick the vice presidential candidate, debate the Voting Rights Act and delegate selection, and whatever fight he wages, he expects them to stick with him.
You got to cut a deal with Walter Mondale to even raise the minority point of view. We've earned the right to raise the issue without anybody's permission.
If Jackson hasn't said what kind of fight he'll be waging at the convention, it is because he and his advisors haven't decided yet. He will be meeting with Mondale Tuesday, but today he seems more disposed to talk about floor fights than party unity. Mary Nissenson, NBC News, with the Jackson campaign in Chicago.
John Turner was sworn in as Canada's new Prime Minister today. Pierre Elliott Trudeau stepped down in a brief private ceremony after 16 years in office. Turner has streamlined his cabinet and promises to run a much more conservative government than Trudeau.
Coming up, reports from Moscow and Washington as the superpowers edge closer to a Star Wars summit. Noah Nelson in Arizona as the bitter and nasty copper strike marks its anniversary. And Jennifer McLogan on the passing of a great lady of the American theater, Lillian Hellman.
The Soviet Union, through its news agency TASS, today accused the United States of setting preconditions for talks on regulating the use of anti-satellite space weapons. The Soviets yesterday proposed, and the Reagan administration agreed to hold those talks in September in Vienna. But the Soviets are now hinting they may back out if the United States insists on linking them with other nuclear weapons issues. We have reports on the proposed talks from both Washington and Moscow. First, Emery King at the White House.
Today, White House officials concede the Soviet offer came as a surprise, but the Reagan administration is seeking to turn it into a target of opportunity. Within hours, the U.S. had accepted the offer.
As media attention focused on the Reverend Jesse Jackson's visit to the State Department yesterday, Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin was able to slip in almost unnoticed to inform Secretary of State George Shultz of the offer. The development then prompted a flurry of behind-the-scenes activity between the State Department and the White House, and it prompted the question, why now? Administration officials believe the Soviets, concerned about the long-range technical ability of the U.S. in space, wanted to slow down the anti-satellite test program here. And they say the Soviets wanted to pressure President Reagan in an election year. As Mr. Reagan left the White House mid-afternoon Friday for Camp David, Shultz had just told him the Soviets wanted to talk. But the Soviet news agency TASS had already released the story. Further evidence, administration officials say, that the Soviets wanted to exert pressure and gain the propaganda initiative. White House officials took care to emphasize the U.S. still places greater priority on the strategic missile talks in Geneva.
The United States government therefore draws attention to the pressing need for the resumption of negotiations aimed at a radical reduction of nuclear weapons on a balanced and verifiable basis.
Although the administration would use Vienna as a forum to promote arms talks at Geneva, the White House doesn't consider that a precondition. One official said the U.S. will go to Vienna if the Soviet offer is serious. Emery King, NBC News, at the White House.
In the World Service of Radio Moscow, here is the...
These are the words carried worldwide in many languages from the broadcast tower of Radio Moscow.
The Soviet government has proposed to the United States government that talks should be started in September on preventing the militarization of outer space.
In broadcast after broadcast, the Soviets say weapons in space will increase the chance of military catastrophe. The offer to talk was first announced on Soviet television last night. Some high-ranked Western observers say it offers nothing new except a time, September, and a place, Vienna. But it came as a surprise to some diplomatic sources here. It followed particularly vitriolic attacks in recent days in the Soviet press on President Reagan, saying any soft words from him are merely campaign rhetoric. Diplomats and observers here are putting two interpretations on the Soviet offer. One, that the Soviets are so far behind in the area of missiles in space that they are willing to give President Reagan the good publicity of East-West talks, even in an election year when it will help him. Others say the Soviets have made a good move in the propaganda and negotiating game, and now President Reagan must make an equally good move, or appear to be, in the words of one Soviet commentator, a missile maniac. Rick Davis, NBC News, Moscow.
Coming up, Cassandra Clayton in Illinois on the border war against drunk driving.
For a half a century, Lillian Hellman was one of our country's foremost playwrights. Her characters were often harsh, sometimes not likable, but always truthful. Lillian Hellman was 77 years old when she died today. Jennifer McLogan has more on her life and remarkable career.
Playwright and author Lillian Hellman, one of America's best-known literary figures, died in a hospital near her summer home on Martha's Vineyard. She had been in ill health for some time. The theatrical community already misses her.
It will be that dazzling mind that you'll remember. I mean, you couldn't, it was as clear. You could disagree, only to have great screaming fights about things, but it always ended in laughter.
Miss Hellman first gained the attention of the nation in 1934 at the age of 27 with her first play, The Children's Hour, about a girls' school divided by accusations of lesbianism, the first of many controversial works. Lillian Hellman was ostracized after writing two plays in the 1940s with international political themes of isolationism and fascism. Miss Hellman was so outspoken in voicing her political convictions during the McCarthy period that the House Committee on Un-American Activities investigated her in 1952. Confronting committee members, she refused to testify, saying, "I will not cut my conscience to fit this year's fashions." An autobiographical work, Pentimento, one of 3 memoirs she wrote in the 1970s, was later made into a film, Julia, starring Jason Robards as writer Dashiell Hammett, with whim she shared a stormy 30-year relationship. In the film, Jane Fonda played Lillian Hellman.
Yes, I would write of my impressions.
During her lifetime, Miss Hellman received numerous literary and dramatic awards. She continued to write and enjoyed an ever-widening audience among young people. It was this new generation of theatergoers that applauded the 1982 Broadway revival of The Little Foxes, starring Elizabeth Taylor. Lillian Hellman lived the philosophy echoed time and again by her characters.
That you do what you can when you can do it.
And she wrote, "You have to live by your own standards, even if you're going to be lonely and unpopular." Jennifer McLogan, NBC News, New York.
In Rhode Island tomorrow, the legal drinking age rises from 20 to 21. And tomorrow, you will have to be 19 instead of 18 to drink in Wisconsin without breaking the law. Sometime before the 4th of July, President Reagan is expected to sign a bill pressuring all states to change their drinking age to 21, all in an effort to crack down on drunken drivers. This weekend, Midwestern states teamed up to do their part. Cassandra Clayton reports from the Illinois-Wisconsin border.
In 7 Midwestern states, police officers stopped cars, checking licenses, equipment violations, but mainly looking for drunk drivers.
Take your right foot and place it directly in front of your left foot.
In Illinois, out of 764 arrests last night, 651 were for drunk driving or other alcohol-related offenses. Police estimate that of every 10 cars stopped, 1 involved an alcohol violation, from possession to drivers having a blood alcohol level above the legal limit of 0.10.
Test it out for 0.23. Okay?
Most of the concentration was along state borders to catch drunk drivers, especially those under 21. A big safety problem along the borders is the difference in drinking ages among the various states. Here in Illinois, the minimum drinking age is 21, but in neighboring Wisconsin, it's been 18. As of midnight tonight, it will go up to 19, but that won't solve the problem.
The problem is they go into Wisconsin now because they have a 19-year-old law, and they come back to Illinois drunk, and they maim and kill themselves.
Even though drivers under age 21 make up only 10% of the nation's drivers, they account for 23% of all drunk driving deaths. Illinois officials say last night's effort involving 7 states was a first, but a joint effort between Illinois and Wisconsin over the past year has resulted in a 24% reduction in fatalities along the border.
It's good to help people like me that's trying to get home in one piece.
Police believe pending federal legislation aimed at pressuring all states to raise their drinking age to 21 will help reduce the problem of young drivers crossing state lines to drink. But they hope more cooperative crackdowns like this will help stop drunk drivers, both young and old. Cassandra Clayton, NBC News at the Illinois-Wisconsin border.
It was exactly 1 year ago today that copper workers went on strike against Phelps Dodge in Arizona. The anniversary was like so many other days since the walkout began, with non-union employees jeered and pelted with rocks by pickets. Noah Nelson has more on the strike that has changed a pair of towns and all the people living in them.
Clifton and Morenci, towns carved out of a mountainside with destinies tied to the copper mine that created them. The absence of peace here because of the strike has produced signs of erosion in both communities. Some businesses have closed because families tired of the tension have given up and moved away. Many of the people here thought the strike and its bitterness would be over by now. But instead, there has only been a deepening of the hostility between the people who have lost their jobs and those who have taken them.
Bye, Dad.
Robert Garcia has a wife and 5 daughters. They're living on $40 a week from the union, money from a few odd jobs, and food stamps. Garcia says his anger against the company and its non-union workers grows every day.
Well, I could blow up any minute anywhere, but what for? I want to lose my family then. Nobody wants to hire me. Why? Because I work for Phelps Dodge.
Garcia says he has been ordered to move from company-owned housing by the mine. He says he is not sure where he and his family will go. Those who still work for the mine, like Lyle Morgan, say the tension has not let up.
We've received some phone calls, and my kids have had trouble at school.
Mine employee Tom Brown says as a precaution he sent his family out of state, but he intends to stay on the job.
I wouldn't accept any harassment. I wouldn't stand by and take it.
What do you mean?
Well, if somebody damages my car, I'm liable to damage their head.
Strikers still stand watch at the mine entrance and still talk of betrayal by those who crossed the picket line a year ago.
But people never forgive each other for what's happened here.
At a union-sponsored picnic to mark the one-year anniversary of the strike, union workers talked of sticking together no matter what happens. Things appear to be far from being settled, and emotions are stronger now than ever before. Noah Nelson, NBC News, Clifton, Arizona.
Coming up, Mike Betcher in Nicaragua, where the Army feels the pressure from its CIA-backed enemies.
Bolivia's President Hernan Siles Zuazo is back at the presidential palace tonight, hours after being kidnapped in a coup attempt. Government officials in La Paz say he was abducted by renegade military officers trying to trigger a coup. He was released 10 hours later after the dissidents failed to win the support of others in the military. The Reagan administration, in a report to be published next week, again accuses Nicaragua of continuing to aid Salvadoran guerrillas. And it says the Nicaraguans have twice as many tanks and armored vehicles as they had last year. But that emphasis on guns has apparently left the Nicaraguan government unable to provide its people bread and butter. Mike Betcher has that story from Managua.
Chasing U.S.-supported counter-revolutionaries for 2 years has left Nicaragua broke. The Nicaraguans have received moral support, but few dollars from their communist allies. Nicaraguans who already endure food shortages are being asked to sacrifice even more. Nicaragua's military leaders are asking mothers to feed their families less to assure there is enough food for the soldiers on the front. The food shortage is so extreme that Nicaraguan officials are closing the open-air free market in Managua, the last place Nicaraguans could buy extra food, though at a higher price. The market's products will now be sent to the army. What are we going to eat now? Shouted an angry vendor. We have nothing left. Nicaragua's agricultural minister Jaime Huiloc exhorted the residents of a northern rebel-infiltrated province, it's better you don't eat for a month than lose your country. A 12-year-old boy told the Nicaraguan commander his mother had told him to join the army and fight. Huiloc sent him away, but said he wished all of Nicaragua's mothers were like the boys. They're not. Some have hidden their sons to keep them from the Nicaraguan draft. The Nicaraguan army is looking for an estimated 2,000 men who have deserted or evaded the draft in the past few months. Nicaragua's army is the largest in Central America, but its commanders now admit for the first time that the CIA-supported guerrillas now completely control sections of northern Nicaragua. The Nicaraguan army, low on food, is fighting back. But moral support from communist countries and Nicaragua's leaders doesn't make it less lonely on Nicaragua's front lines. Mike Betcher, NBC News, Managua, Nicaragua.
All the passengers aboard a Lebanon-bound boat intercepted by Israeli gunboats are released tonight. 63 people were on the small boat heading from Cyprus to Lebanon when it was intercepted in order to dock in the Israeli port of Haifa. 9 passengers were detained for questioning, but the others were allowed to continue on their way. The 9 were later driven to Israeli-occupied southern Lebanon and let go.
Next, Bill Schechner at an international sporting event where pride and skill triumph over disability.
There were no huge crowds as there will be at the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, but the competition itself was enough for some courageous athletes from around the world who gathered on Long Island. Bill Schechner reports on the wrap-up of the International Games for the Disabled.
The traditional sights and sounds of international games. The athletes here, quite another story. The International Games for the Disabled, a once-in-4 years event for nearly 1,800 athletes from 54 nations. Eligible are the palsied, the blind, the amputees, persons whose minds are sound but whose bodies are not. And while these are serious athletic contests, they are also bouts with other opponents, stereotypes and self-doubt and the shunning of that which is different.
Push, Tom, push.
Tom Becky's legs were crippled by cerebral palsy at birth. He must loosen his muscles carefully, and he has learned to do this, just as he learned when young to deal with the stares of children. Now the stares are in admiration. Tom Becky is a champion and a lesson.
What's your name?
Jennifer.
It kind of flashed back a little bit in my mind. These kids, I think they came out and that they saw it win a competition. They were proud of me, and I was proud of myself. And that was a real good feeling.
In the case of Canadian Eva Sager, the word is not pride, but necessity. She was blinded in a car crash 3 years ago, and she has adapted by learning to feel and hear what once she saw, and has become skilled at it. Helmeted for protection, Eva Sager is one of Canada's best players of this game for the blind. The game is played in silence, with a ball with bells inside. Players block shots after tracking the sounds of the ball. They are blindfolded so that those with partial vision have no advantage. The performance is altogether remarkable. Still, such skills do not overcome the eerie feelings the blind trigger in the sighted. Eva Sager remembers that.
Now that I'm on the other end of the stick, I can say to them, look, it's really no different. I just don't see as well as you do.
But it is different, isn't it?
Yes, it's hard. It's really hard. But you have to just keep going.
These are the finals of a contest for the severely disabled. The leader is Ireland's Brendan Cream. It is an obscure event, one of dozens on a hot afternoon on a field far from the center. But what is happening here is at the center, even more than the athletes, of what sets these games apart. The idea that spirited pursuit makes victors of all.
It's no good just saying you got a goal. You want to get more. It's like what I heard fellas saying, you want to be running for a goal and don't sit back about it. Just run for a goal.
Bill Schechner, NBC News, Uniondale, Long Island.
That's our news. John Palmer will be here tomorrow night. I'm Connie Chung, NBC News, New York. Thank you for joining us, and good night from all of us at NBC News.